Before we start, gapping is a fairly advanced move and it's pretty crucial that you can already comfortably backhop and pedal kick. If you can't yet do these, then please check out my tutorial linked in the description on how to get controlled backhops and then get practicing. This video will be waiting for you when you're ready. After backhops, gaps are one of the most useful techniques for riding trials. They can really expand your riding, allowing access to previously locked riding spots. They're also a great way to get creative and put your own spin, excuse the pun, on the streets. There's many different ways to gap, from a bunny hop with pedal assist, from completely static, and a combination of all of these. You can use them to link walls and rails, get up to higher objects or down to lower ones, and they're an extremely satisfying move and one I recommend trying to get as good as possible. Today I'll explain how to do a few techniques, some obvious and some a little bit more subtle. The bigger the gap, the more useful these tips will be. First, I'm going to start with static. I've chosen a medium-sized gap, but start as small as you like. However, if you go too small, then there's not much difference from a standard pedal kick. There's 4 main points to a static gap: the setup, the preload, the kick, and the landing. Let's start with the setup. The idea is to try and make the gap as small as possible. To do this, we need to get right on the edge on the back wheel. This is where it's vital to have a controlled backhop, as you need to be accurate to make the most of this technique. By getting close to the edge, you're accomplishing 2 things. Firstly, you've made the gap as small as possible, but secondly, you can also utilize the rebound more effectively from the tire. By having the tire fold slightly around the edge, you're compressing it more than you would just on the flat. It also rebounds you in the perfect up and forwards direction needed, and this is called a pinch gap. Being able to pinch gap is vital for being able to gap from rails or anything else narrow where you can't let your wheel roll much. I should probably mention that tire pressure has a huge effect on gaps too. A softer, say around 20 psi tire is easier to gap than a hard one, say 60. I run 45 psi, but it looks softer as all my weight is on a small portion of the tire. Now, a common thing I see is riders taking off too far back. It's still possible to gap like this, but you're essentially making the gap bigger by taking off further away, plus you don't get the full advantage of the tire rebound. Now let's move on to the preload. Like I said in all my tutorials, it is vital that you make your body lead the move. Now there's 2 main ways to preload. One way is definitely the most common, but I'll also show you a slightly different method too. Did you spot the difference? First, the most common. Once you've got into position on the edge, you need to shift your weight down and back. Much like jumping on your feet, you must bend your legs in order to jump at all. The weight shift down and back squashes the tire, giving it the best chance to give the most rebound. You can see me switch from looking at the edge to looking for the landing point. My arms are quite stiff, like I'm trying to pull the bars into my waist. I allow the front wheel to almost lower to the point of dipping into the gap. The main difference between the different ways to preload is the angle of the bike. Notice how I've turned the bike slightly sideways. I'm right foot forward, so I've turned the bike a few degrees to the right. Let's look at another angle. You can see a bit more clearly how much angle I add. The exact angle is personal or dependent on the setup, so have a play and see what works for you. Adding a bit of angle gives a little bit more room to move your body. This is more important on a shorter bike where you can hit the bars with your thighs before the body movement is done. I do a couple of little quirks like drop my left knee down slightly and bite my lip, but don't worry about forcing yourself to do these. Speaking of hitting thighs, keep your phone in your pocket at your own risk. It's definitely possible to smash the screen doing gaps. The end result of this preload style is an upwards arc across the gap, landing with a downwards direction. This is a great way to gap, but can sometimes be a little harsh on the landing, resulting in a puncture. The second method is to go much straighter. From this angle you can see how much straighter I am. The advantage of this is having slightly more accuracy. Taking away the angled takeoff can make it less likely to slip if grip is an issue, and sometimes an angled takeoff can make you continue to rotate when landing, which isn't ideal if you need to land perfectly straight. My front wheel dips slightly lower going straight, which is good for gaps to front too. A straighter takeoff can give a much lower, flatter arc in the air, which can make the landing smoother and less likely to puncture. Step 3, the kick. This is the most complex part of the gap. As the name suggests, you kick the pedals to create forwards momentum, but there's a lot more going on. From the preload position, you need to spring your body up and forwards. The faster you can spring, the further you will go. The timing for releasing the back brake and kicking the pedals is halfway through the spring motion. As I've mentioned multiple times, the body initiates any move, so it's important not to kick too soon. Because the wheel is so close to the edge, it might dip down the gap initially. This is why it's important to preload and jump your body first. You weigh more than the bike, so it will follow what you do. If you jumped forwards and upwards, the bike will also do that. It's also important to kick the pedal with as much power as you can. Static gaps are the most stressful move on the chain and you can snap them, so make sure you have a strong one. Now notice how my legs are much straighter. That's the end result of the spring. Also, my body's moved forward so the bars are at my thighs. Pulling hard on the bars will also help with the jump. Once the kick is done, we need to concentrate on the landing. I'm preparing for the landing as soon as I've finished the kick. The bike has now started to catch up with my body and I'm fairly weightless on the pedals at this point. I'm allowing the bike's momentum to overtake my body. Now I'm straightening my legs, putting pressure on the pedals, pushing the back wheel to where I want it to go. I'm pulling slightly on the bars to bring the bike more vertically and looking at the landing point. When the wheel lands, it's important to bend your legs and absorb the landing as much as possible. I bend my legs and keep my weight backwards. This is important if you want to keep it on the rear wheel. You've carried some momentum over, so keeping the weight back allows the momentum to carry you forwards onto the back wheel's balance point. Now there's a really subtle movement I do a millisecond before landing that really helps to be smoother. This works really well with the straighter preload technique. It doesn't look like much, but before I land, I start sucking the bike up with my legs. This does two things. Firstly, by moving my body, I'm preempting the landing, which makes me land with less weight. It also slightly moves the wheel up, and I do mean slightly, which takes away even more harshness. Landing in a downwards direction on a sharp edge is the quickest way to get a puncture, so by slightly changing the angle, it has a big effect on the smoothness. I tend to keep my back brake off until I'm close to the landing point, but that's personal preference. Here's another angle. Now, did you spot where my wheel stopped the arc and stayed flatter before landing? Right there. Now that's the key to getting extra smooth gaps. This gap was on my limit and it took me a few goes. I didn't add enough power into the kick on this one. This one I landed with my weight too far back. This one was close to having my weight too far back, but I got it in the end. So to recap, set up on the edge using back hops. Preload by bending your legs and compressing the tyre. I'm doing an angled one here for this bigger gap. Spring the body up and forwards while kicking the pedals. Allow the bike to be weightless and come up under you. Push the back wheel into the landing by straightening your legs and then bending them to absorb the impact. These tips can be mostly translated to gaps to front also. The setup and preload are identical, but the kick and definitely the landing are different. To land on the front wheel, I keep my weight further forwards after the kick. I don't let the back wheel catch up with my body and I don't pull the bars as high into my thighs. I then push the bars to lower the front wheel into the landing. This gap is a little smaller, so I could get away with landing on the flat top. My weight is forwards, but not extremely so. Much like landing to back wheel, I'm keeping my weight further back to allow my momentum to carry me forwards. Once your momentum has caught up, it's a case of doing a wheel swap. Link below for that tutorial. Or if there's room, just let off the front brake and let the bike roll forwards to both wheels. On bigger gaps, it's more important to land on the corner to get grip. By missing the edge, it's a lot harder for the brake to hold and tyre to grip. Any movement on the front wheel makes it hard to carry the momentum and keep the back wheel up for a wheel swap. I could have fixed this with having my weight further forwards, but you do risk going over the bars then. I only just got this one. In this case, the front wheel landed perfectly, but my weight wasn't quite forwards enough, meaning that once my momentum had caught up and pushed me forwards, it was still a little far back to make the wheel swap easy. Now this one went perfectly. Like I keep saying, it's all about getting your body to do things first. I had my weight further forwards and landed the front wheel perfectly. My momentum carried me forwards and made the wheel swap a lot easier. Another way to gap is with a run-up, either from a bunny hop, a full pedal stroke or a half pedal stroke. You can also combine a run-up with a static gap to give more momentum. These are great if you've only got a small takeoff point such as a wall, but has a run-up leading to it. A combination will get you further than a regular static gap, but not as far as a full bunny hop or pedal gap would. Let's start with a half pedal gap. I start around a foot from the edge. If the run-up is shorter, it can help to go a bit of an angle. There's two preload points for this. The first is right at the start where you want to be track standing bad foot forward, weight slightly back, preloaded, ready to spring forwards. Next, start to spring forward slightly with your body, then start the pedal rotations. As you pedal, keep low and preloaded on the bike. As your good foot is getting to the 1 o'clock position, start the second bigger spring forwards. This is much like a static gap now, and you want to do the same upwards and forwards spring and at the same time kick the pedal. The only difference is the momentum has already been initiated and there's no tire pinch takeoff. You might find you go in a higher arc with a pedal gap, so these are good if you need to clear any objects that might otherwise hit your wheel if you went lower. Landing is much the same as with static. Spot the edge, straighten your legs for landing and then absorb the shock. I still do my last moments sucking up of the back wheel to make the landing a little bit smoother. Half pedal gaps are probably my most used method of gapping, especially if there's any kind of run-up. They're really efficient and allow some big gaps to be done. Pedal gaps with a full rotation allow bigger gaps to be done. They're identical to a half pedal, only you add a little bit more momentum at the start. Here's a bigger one, and you can see how the extra speed and momentum makes it easier to cover a bigger distance. I start with my good foot at the 12 o'clock position. I'm carrying speed here, but you can start from a standstill too. I do a half crank on the pedal, bringing my bad foot to the 12 o'clock position. I've kept my body low and the front wheel on the floor. I do another half pedal to bring my good foot around ready for the kick. At the same time, I've lifted my front wheel. I'm now starting to spring up from my crouch preload, and I have my eyes set on the landing. I've now powered my kick and jumped by straightening my legs and pulling on the bars. Like the gaps before, I let the bike go light under me and start to overtake. The arc is the biggest yet and handy for going up things. Again, extend the legs and aim for the edge. It's possible to still suck up the back wheel to be smoother, pretty handy as the extra speed makes punches pretty easy to get. Absorb the landing with your legs and keep your weight back if you want to keep it on the rear wheel. The biggest gaps can be done with a bunny hop. The only limit is your speed and strength. As it suggests, this is just a bunny hop. No kicks, no special pedal rotations, just go fast and jump high. Bunny hop gaps are great, but they're the hardest to be accurate with and the most likely to give you a puncture. The more you can absorb the landing, the better. I really hope these tips can help you. There's so many combinations with gaps, so go out and experiment. Most of my advice here will translate to other types. I have a few more tutorials which I'll link down in the description. Please go check those out if you want any more tips for trials riding. If you like my channel, then please consider subscribing. Also give me a like and a comment down in the description. I want to know what you thought of this video. My goal for 2020 is to get to 100,000 subscribers, so any help you guys can do will be greatly appreciated. And likewise, if you want to support me and this channel, make these videos possible, then please consider buying some merch from Clarkson.com. I also have a Patreon as well for $2 a month. But if you want to help without any commitments, then I also accept donations via PayPal. All of these things will be linked below. Thanks for watching. Let me know if these tips helped you, and I'll catch you next time. So see you later, everyone. Bye bye.